Welcome to Cutting Edge Web Content Development, the podcast where we delve into the world of CMS systems and their crucial role in website and web content development. In each episode, we'll explore the reasons why founders, CEOs, CTOs, and CMOs of web content development companies need CMS systems to thrive in the digital landscape. Get ready to uncover the secrets behind successful website management, content creation, and seamless user experiences. Here's your host, Jonathan Ames.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Web Content Development, a podcast by ButterCMS. Here we share insights on the intersection of content and web development, and how you can align these two often competing forces to improve efficiency and business results. Joining us in this episode is Anthony Sharot, Performance Marketing Director and founder of Market Appeal, a boutique search marketing agency, to talk about SEO and CRO and how to acquire and convert traffic. So welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Guide us through, you have a really good resume. You worked for some amazing names that people were going to recognize. Guide us through kind of your career, things you've learned, some of the projects you worked on.
I started in 2006 as a search specialist, have been practicing organic search, to an extent paid search and CRO since then. Freelanced for a while, started my own agency. A few years after that, went back to consulting. Recent-ish companies I worked for, most recently was WhatsApp. Before that, Unilever, Vodafone, where I was head of global SEO for a year and a half, going on 2 years, and quite a few other big household names. So although I started my career mainly with startups and sort of scale-ups, SMEs, more recently I've worked with a lot of the larger enterprises, typically global brands. And so I've seen the whole spectrum. And some things that work at one end of the scale maybe don't work so well at the other, and vice versa.
Absolutely. No, there's some big differences between small and medium-sized businesses and what you can do at an enterprise scale, and also what you can't do quickly, at least at an enterprise scale. So they're both there. Well, tell us about this idea from the strategic level, SEO, CRO. How can you use these two to kind of create a synergy to maximize both?
So they naturally go together, because SEO is all about getting the traffic to your website, typically from Google or another search engine. CRO is about converting it once it arrives. So it's not really an either or. Really, you need both, because there's no point having traffic you can't convert, or a great conversion rate if you've got no traffic to begin with. So the thing is that there are people who studied both to an equal extent, but because of how careers work and people get pushed into a department or pigeonholed, it's more common that you learn a lot more of one and a lot less of the other. And then you need two people together to make the whole thing work, or possibly more than that.
Mm-hmm. Tell us, I mean, these are both things that everybody wants. They want traffic, they want conversions. Why are people not getting it? What are the common mistakes or pitfalls of these two that keep people from getting it?
So it's not necessarily that they're making the mistake, but they need to understand it from the perspective of the consumer, the customers they're trying to target. Because a lot of traffic often comes from informational searches. How do I do this? How does it work? And that kind of thing. Your blog often gets by far the most traffic in your website, because it's much easier to write about an interesting topic. You can pick often almost anything you want. Whereas a number of people, especially if you're in, say, B2B SaaS or another one of these niche areas, you may have a very, very small target market. And when you look at the search volume on Google, it could be a few hundred people a month, low thousands if you're lucky. Whereas your blog could be hitting tens, hundreds of thousands or more. So the challenge is that most people who want to learn something aren't necessarily ready to buy the particular thing you're selling at the time you want to sell it. And conversely, the people who want to buy, there's just not enough of them to make much happen. So when you think about it in those terms, it's not really that the website's doing anything wrong per se, but they need to understand how to take people on a journey and bridge the gap, both in terms of timing, but also in terms of intent.
Excellent. So I think I see where you're going with this. Is this kind of what marketers would call you, moving people from your top of funnel to your middle of funnel, kind of having a journey for them to go through in content?
It is. Marketeers like to draw these martini glasses, these funnels, and they have this image. You pour people in at the top and they sort of trickle down the spiral and they come out of the bottom, and it's all nice and easy to control because we're brilliant marketeers. And so of course they're going to do what we tell them to do. The reality is that maybe the analogy I often use is insurance, say car insurance. Once a year, you need it. It's often a legal requirement, and you're coming up for renewal. You've got 15, maybe 30 days to buy. You're in that window. The rest of the year, you can pester your car insurance adverts all you like. I'm just not ready to buy. And so this idea of the funnel sort of presupposes that you can dictate the timing to the customer. Really, it's usually the other way around. You have to try and keep that sort of awareness and presence of mind until they're ready. Now, maybe sometimes they didn't even know they needed it until you can encourage them. You can do a certain amount of demand generation, but you can't create a problem for them that they don't have. So yeah.
Yeah. So despite, the fact that there's a whole arm of marketing that tries to do just that, they try to create demand. None call them demand generation marketers. And it is, they would argue an art form, but truly there are certain windows of readiness that someone has in the buying journey. How can you align then, your SEO with your CRO to create this journey and does it all have to happen on the website or does it happen somewhere else?
That's a good question. For the record, when I was working at WhatsApp, I was in the demand generation team. So don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be too scathing about the discipline, but I think many people who do it would also concede it's quite challenging. And often it sounds easy. Oh, we'll go out and generate demand, but really it's more about starting with the awareness. And then, as I said, often the timing you can't control. But to answer your question, so you can probably, if you can't write a popular blog, you can hire someone who can. It's doable. There's no shortage of good writers out there. When you consider that the people are coming in, they've read your article, they're interested in that topic. What do you think they probably want more of? It probably isn't to buy the magic widgets that you're selling right now, but you probably quite easily, from knowing what they came in to read, can take a guess on what they'd like to read more of. So in this example, they came in to read about, say, SEO and how to generate more people to the blog. Well, maybe they want to know how to convert the traffic from the blog. That could be the next piece of content you can offer to them. Or maybe the blog was, good, but 1,000 words. It's not the final answer. You can offer them an ebook on the same topic, something more substantial. And the idea is that either you'll just form more of a relationship because knowing they came in for information, we're not trying to do a hard sell. We're offering them more information to help them along that journey. If it's a download, for example, or a newsletter on a similar topic, you might be able to get some contact details for them, bearing in mind that typically 95% or more of people who read your website will just disappear. If you can even get the number who sign up or engage with an ebook or newsletter from, say, 1% to 5% or 10, that's a 5 or 10 times improvement in terms of the number of people you're actually engaged with. And then you can proactively start to communicate with them, because sometimes building that list is underrated, but even a list of a few hundred or 1,000 high quality contacts can be valuable.
I think I totally agree with what you're saying. I think that one of the big things that often marketers miss, they get this idea of like, all right, not everyone's ready to buy my product up front, but I got to show some kind of metrics because, executives like, hey, well, what's the result of all these blogs you're writing? You're getting traffic in, but they're not converting. And so then they say, all right, well, I'm going to make an email newsletter. So people come into the blog and they start sending them out emails. And so one of the issues there is often they take no hint of why they came in. What was the content that brought them in, and try to give that in the afterwards. Instead, the person who gets the emails gets barraged with basically more CTAs of, go buy our product or try our free trial or whatever it is. And so, yeah, how can you make sure that, all right, for SEO, you have this wide funnel of many different topics. You're trying to bring them in typically through a blog. Now they come in. How do you, without writing, do you write 20 different newsletters for all those segments? How do you think you create that CRO conversion through, the process you're describing there?
Sure. What you said is quite interesting. I've worked in a startup, more than one, but one in particular comes to mind from not too long ago. We'd been doing this a while before I arrived as well. They had several thousand people from their target market who had signed up, given over their details. And so they needed more sales one month. So the managing director, the CEO, comes in and says, right, we need sales. We've got all these contacts. And he pretty much led from the front and said, look, we're going to send them all an email. The email's going to tell them to buy now. We're going to get some more sales and then we'll hit our targets for the month. And you can guess what happened. We emailed our entire list, no segmentation, no real thought as to what they actually wanted. And there were very few sales, practically none, from over 10,000 emails sent out to exactly the right audience as well. And so just because they're on the email list, they're still a step or two back from buying. One thing that I'm quite keen on, get them onto a webinar, because the problem is so far, all they've done is read and, look at a few words on a page, a picture if you're lucky. There's no relationship there. There's no emotion. There's no trust. And so even if they were ready to buy, it doesn't mean they're ready to buy from you. Getting video content can work as well, but of course it tends to be one way. So the webinar is where you become human and they suddenly start to think, okay, this is somebody I could work with. Maybe I actually want to deal with that individual. And it's no longer a faceless brand. And that often can be a good way to bridge the gap from one to the other.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think webinars could be a really good way to do that. Of course, you're talking, outside of a website here. Perhaps you're going to use some other platform for that. This is kind of a complex process that you're bringing someone through here. And you're talking about, possibly including emails, webinars along the journey. What are the metrics you use to kind of be able to track people through here and convince the higher ups that this CRO stuff that you're talking about, this life cycle marketing is really doing its job, that it's, worth the expense?
Funnily enough, I've had this discussion the past few days. A scale up I work with in the property space in New York and other cities in the States. We've had the bosses come down, said we want everyone to set targets for the year. This is the exact discussion. And what we've done is we've split it 2 or 3 ways. So the business cares about strategic goals, revenue, that kind of top line stuff. And that's what they want us to drive. But that's no use to us day to day. What we're doing is typically driving, for example, traffic, or we're writing a blog. It's much more immediate stuff. And so within the team, most of our goals are what I would call tactical. They're much more short term. They're stuff we can measure within a day or two and use to reorientate our direction frequently. They still have to align with the strategic goal in the medium long term, but we might check whether we're aligned on a monthly basis. That's or it's too distant and too slow to tell us day to day. We launch a blog post. We don't know what impact it has on revenue. It's just not. So the other thing is to distinguish outputs from outcomes. When I set a target for my copywriter, I'm not going to tell them to generate a certain amount of traffic. It's too indirect. I'll tell them to write, on popular topics, how many blogs per month. These are outputs that we can actually measure and see if they're doing the work and staying on track. The outcome should follow from that, but you can't put, you need to put the cause before the effect, and the tactics need to align with the strategy, but they're all different things. So that way, a simple example to give you in CRO terms, we want to get more revenue. Well, everyone does. That's the end goal. But it could be several steps down the journey. It depends on how much traffic, other things you don't control when you're just doing CRO. So what we would call the primary metric, the thing we're really trying to optimize, might just be the number of clicks on that button on that page as a percentage of traffic. That's really what this test is about. And that way we don't get too lost in the big picture. We can just do that one task well. The bigger button, the better call to action, whatever it is, the better placement. That means a successful test. And they should all add up to what we want in the end.
Excellent. So what you're saying is, first make metrics around outputs, how many blog articles I'm going to get done, or, what's number of optimization tests I'm going to run, and then run metrics looking for kind of a narrow scope of, I want to improve this lever because if I improve output there, I think that in the end, it's going to hit this top line number, the revenue or the conversions, whatever the leads. Okay, excellent. As far as, time frame, because obviously this is, like you said, someone for insurance once a year. How much time should somebody give if they're not super familiar with this process to really give it a shot, where you can say, hey, our CRO efforts or our SEO and CRO efforts together really created a difference, a change that's measurable, and we want to put more budget in this?
I think ultimately that's a business decision. Not everyone has the time and the patience, and sometimes that's dictated by external factors. And that's where the pressure often comes from, because your CRO target might be for a third of your tests to improve things. Often that's realistic. Most of your tests improve things all the time. It probably tells you you're starting from a really bad place. It's that easy to get better, consistent. So what I would say is, this is why we kind of set the tactical targets. If we can show a third of our tests improve things by an average of 5% each time, then we can project forward to say, okay, how many tests, what time frame? There's other limiting factors. if you want things to be statistically significant, how much traffic do you have? If it takes 4, 6, 8 weeks for a test to come to a meaningful result, you can't run that many at the same time. Or maybe you can if you run them in parallel. Maybe you can run a test separately at the same time on a product page, on the checkout. Maybe you can do a different test in a different area, like on getting the blog to convert. So rather than trying to force one thing to happen quicker than it can, you can work in different areas in parallel and therefore make faster progress overall.
Great advice. Well, let's shift then to the tactical side of this. What does it look like setting up one of these tests that you're talking about? What would you give as advice to someone if they wanted to try this out?
When I was early in my career, I come from a science and engineering background. I love the idea of multivariate testing. We'll have all these different images, these different headlines, calls to action. We'll split test everything at once, come up with the perfect combination, and it'll be brilliant. And that can work if you're someone like, say, Vodafone or Verizon, AT&T, millions and millions of people visiting a page every day. You can test very granular. For most of the people probably listening to this, they do not have the traffic volume to ever get multivariate testing to tell them what's working. They need to do the opposite. We're not trying to learn, we're just trying to improve. So do change as much as you can at once as possible is one way to do it. What I call a big bang test. There's a chance it works and we don't know why. There's a chance it fails miserably. There's also a chance we actually make a significant impact without waiting forever to see what happens. The opposite of science, but it is business and it can work. And the other thing is just not everywhere in your site gets the same traffic. Maybe your homepage, your main landing page, maybe the basket, they're the high traffic areas, sort of like the corridor everyone is funneled down. Within those pages, most of the people probably see the top bit above the fold. Most of them probably don't scroll down that far, especially if they don't have to. So you're much more likely, if you change a high visibility part of a high visibility page, you might actually make a difference to most people and see a result more quickly.
That's excellent advice. Actually, I've tried that before in the past, and sometimes you do get big, amazing results, and sometimes they do fail miserably. I have had both in my tests, like what you're describing. So that's good advice. So if you're smaller, maybe look to those big changes. If you're bigger, go the multivariate way and do it that way.
Another option you have, if you don't have a lot of traffic, you may never be able to holy grail of statistical significance or not quick enough. Just try it on people. The focus groups or usability testing usually has a very small sample. You can either do it in person, ideally with people who look like your target audience. Frankly, humans are humans. Or there's websites out there where you can do a 5-second test and pay a small amount of money to get a few members of a demographic you target to look at a site and give you feedback. And if they all look at your homepage or your landing page and say, you know what, I'm confused, no idea what they do, you probably don't need 1 million people in a calculator to find out the common thread.
And it's surprising how often that very response is the response. I'm confused. I don't know what it is you sell. If I had a penny for every time I heard, I'd be rich. So this is a common problem, is when you typically are in your industry, when you're in your role at your company, you know the product really well, you know the industry well, and a lot of your customers may not know it that well. They may be an influencer, they may be a decision maker, and it may only have a peripheral understanding of your product and industry. And if they come to your site and what comes out of their mouth is what you just said, you've got a problem with conversion rate. Yeah. So going out and getting somebody to test this, you talked about doing it live in person. Are there some digital ways that somebody might do that if they don't have maybe a focus group out there to go run it against?
Yes. What the big boys do, of course, is get people in a lab. They film it, record it. I'm tracking tools, very expensive stuff. You don't really need most of that because in reality, you're not meeting your customers in person when it's a website. They're finding your webpage online. So using online usability tools where people will just maybe be recorded by their webcam, but more to the point, you can see where the mouse is, where they're clicking. That's actually the behavior you want them to do for real anyway. So it's not so much a simulation, it's actually exactly what you want the customers to do. And so I think that's in many ways as valuable as trying to do the in-person testing. It can all be done quite cost effectively online, remote.
Now, I've heard of actually some services out there that do just that. They basically say, you put in whatever it is you want tested, and we'll bring the people, and here you put in the questions that you want to ask, the processes you want them to do, and then we'll spit you back the feedback for that. Have you ever tried one of those services? Have you felt like it might be good or not?
I have occasionally. I've been fortunate recently to work in big firms where we can often do live testing with, I worked at the AA, for example, on the breakdown service. And so that's got hundreds of thousands of visitors a month. But yeah, for the smaller firms, there are some good platforms out there, which I'd certainly recommend. A quick search on Google will find you half a dozen that will meet the bill.
Very good. Let me ask you another question. This time, once again, putting SEO and CRO together. One of the things that you do when you gain new traffic, let's say you pick up a keyword that you're trying to rank for, and now you start ranking for that. Does the type of traffic you're bringing in have an effect on your conversion rate? Like if you start ranking for a new word that you haven't ranked for before, and how do you kind of take out that variable when you're trying to run on-page tests like you're talking about, where let's say at the same time you're trying to optimize a page and maybe put in a different CTA in there, or a different email to the people who sign up for your list?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a few ways to approach that. Variation, whether natural or because of you changing direction in the audience, is always going to be a challenge when you're doing this kind of testing. But there's a few ways to approach it. One, if you have enough data, is to segment by audience. So we'll look at, let's say, just people coming from our brand name to the web page as opposed to from generic keyword. Or we might say, okay, we've got different buckets here. We've got the paid traffic, Google Ads, maybe from paid social. We've got the organic, we've got referral, we've got direct. If I make a change to this page, do all of these different groups convert better at the same time? Or does it favor one over the other? And so those are two very different scenarios. Hopefully it works better for everyone. But if not, then maybe we can go back a step. Oh, look, it improved for mobile users, but not for desktop. Well, that's told us something interesting. Maybe on the small screen, they're more challenged to begin with. And so actually that was really quite useful.
Yeah, no, great advice there. Great advice, especially going and comparing one segment in your, say, Google Analytics or whatever analytics package used for your website with another segment. And so if your SEO segment, your organic segment is showing a declining conversion rate, then maybe that's due to this new ranking keyword, which maybe is not as keen to convert as the ones you had before. And you compared that, say, against your direct traffic or paid traffic, and you saw the conversion rate there stayed steady, then maybe that might be the case. Really appreciate that. Great advice. So once again, to the tactical side, could you share some practical tips on optimizing a single page, both to improve SEO rankings and conversion rates?
I can. I wanted to actually share a different thought before we got there. At the beginning, you were asking about the blog versus the main site, and we discussed it in the context of CRO and traffic. But of course, in SEO terms, there's another important dimension to all of this, which is backlinks. Sites always have needed links when it comes to Google to rank well. Maybe not as many today as they did 10 years ago, but it's still a key factor. And the challenge is you're probably quite dry and not terribly interesting product pages, unless somebody's really ready to buy, are not the natural thing that everyone wants to link to from their blogs and articles. They want to link to the riveting piece you just published on your blog. And so the blog can be great for acquiring backlinks without having to go out and buy them or anything necessarily white hat. And then you can link internally from your blog page, the one that has shared the facts and stats and the infographic. And so you can use the links acquired by the blog to help the rankings of your product pages, which are the ones that will rank for the targeted keywords that will convert. Because what you tend to see is as the blog gains more and more traffic, the site's conversion rate actually goes down because as a share of the total, the information is getting ever bigger. The number of buyers doesn't keep growing magically when the number of readers does. And so if anything, that's a challenge. But when you look at it in terms of other factors, then you can kind of see the bigger picture. Coming back to your question about how SEO and CRO can work together, I would say the common element always are the human. Especially in SEO in years gone by, it's been a bit easy to lose sight of the fact we're actually building a website for people. If only we create 1,000 or 100,000 pages for Google, we'll get more traffic, which is great, except that is it content anyone actually wants to read? Is it even readable? Very average information being churned out by everyone. But AI has actually turned out to be a blessing for humans because now everyone can churn out moderately readable information. And Google's completely full of it. Only the really good sites that actually are well written are starting to thrive. And an awful lot of second-tier sites are now struggling. I've seen a lot of them since September last year when the helpful content updates started to roll out. A lot of sites that have been very big and popular, they're struggling because they've had content that was just about good enough, that being the cornerstone of their policy, And now they're finding they need actually really good quality content that's different and unique and interesting and readable and factual and researched and all of the things you'd actually really want from it to say something is high quality. So by leveling the playing field, those really good players are going to be the ones that stand out and win. And if they've been investing in that for years and wondering why it wasn't paying off, maybe today it is when everyone else is suffering. In terms beyond that, a lot of CRO is about giving people what they want in the way they want it. And that's where it aligns with SEO. So at the end of an article, maybe I don't want to buy, but I do want to know more about the author. Maybe I want to follow them on social media. So sort of the right thing at the right time. You said there's a lot of steps to this. Well, sort of there are, but trying to do it in one step doesn't work anyway. So you need to lead people on the journey and think about at this stage, what are they ready for? What are they interested in? You can't force them to buy quicker, so there's not really any point trying.
When you are working either internally or an agency, how would you map out these kind of journeys?
So it's a good question. And obviously you don't want too many steps. We're not trying to string them along forever. That's not the idea. But it could be 3 or 4 stages. We're going to go from information. We're going to try and get them something more information on a theme that we know will interest them. Maybe we could see where the people from the first article went next or what else they searched on Google in a similar theme. We then want to do information capture. We want to engage them. This is the webinar. And then we have the relationship and we can start to look to sell. So typically, if you're lucky, 3 or 4 steps in total. We're not talking dozens. That's the steps in the process. The person themselves may engage with you a dozen, maybe several dozen times before they actually buy. I know when I go to book a holiday, I can research for a month. I must do hundreds of searches across dozens of sites before I end up booking something. So there might only be 3 or 4 steps to the process, but I might repeat each step in terms of reading more and more or searching more and more dozens of times. And so in terms of the number of contacts or touch points, it can be a large number. And that's where you build the trust and the relationship before being ready to take the final step.
Excellent. Now, when you've kind of mapped this out for your team in your mind of these, let's say 3 or 4 steps, you've got, your metrics, your inputs that you're going to do to create the steps. You've got some metrics that you can track as they go through those steps. When do you feel like you've succeeded? This is a tough one for the CRO because it's almost like it's a never-ending target. Yeah, go ahead.
When you've made enough money to retire early, it's always a good cycle.
Great. Yeah. This is a common question because when you have people who are not used to doing tests, which by its very nature, a test, you do not know the outcome. You have a hypothesis, you test it, you find out. But, sometimes it can take some time to do this. And you may get some, results, like say you got a 1% improvement rate. Now, do you keep doing this until you get to a 10%, conversion rate? Or do you say at 5, we probably maxed out? How do you figure out where that kind of diminishing returns point is at a particular thing and maybe move on to trying to optimize something else?
I'd say there's 2 key factors here. One of them is what I call pain points, but what somebody else might refer to as, say, the funnel dropout rate. If you have a 5-step sign-up process and the dropout at each step is, say, 20 or 30%, apart from one where people drop out at a rate of 80%, well, even a relatively small improvement at that one point is you've probably got the most to gain there. You can look at it in terms of like the curve and where suddenly it drops most sharply, but also bringing it back to the humans and the element of sort of human pain. If you can get some feedback on each stage, then you can start to understand what the issue is. Are they confused? Are they off-putting? Maybe if we just reassure them we're not going to abuse their credit card details or their data, we can give them the confidence to take a step that they wanted to take, but they didn't trust us or there was a lot of fears and uncertainty in their mind. So sometimes just by looking at the feedback surveys you get at each stage will tell you actually, this is where people's anxiety is peaking. Doesn't really matter what the numbers say. We don't want people to feel like that at this point in the process. Let's address that.
All right. You've given some great advice here, Anthony. Any last things that you would give as advice to businesses trying to either improve their SEO or their CRO efforts?
Success is not always linear. You need to keep in mind why you're doing this, who you're trying to help. And it's quite common for a startup, particularly before they get this famous product market fit. They don't know what's going to work. There isn't a playbook. There's lots of people who can tell you the magic answer they found somewhere else. Chances are it's not going to work for you. And that's what makes it interesting and challenging. You have to find your own solution to your own problem. So it does take work, it does take perseverance, and it takes understanding the problem, but also the payoff can be huge. And so it takes a certain kind of person to see it through, but that's also, when you get it right, that's sort of the reminder of why you've been trying all that time.
I understand that feeling. There was a particular place that I worked at where basically I was in charge of maybe testing things over and over again. And none of the tests themselves, had, I think, more than a 3 or 4% bump in improvement. But over the course of about a year, I think the team was able to improve the overall click-through rates by something like 480%. Just because they added up, because all these little things, here and there and such. And so I really have, personal experience with what you're talking about that can work. It does take, there's not a magic formula for it, but there are people out there who have experience in it, who have learned to do it a little faster. And thank you so much for sharing some of those experiences that you've had. Let me ask you, just career-wise, and I ask this to all my guess, because I think it's important. If you're junior in your career, this is what you want to know. What advice, if you could go back in a time machine, talk to yourself at the beginning of your career, what's the one piece of advice that you would give yourself? Things that you know now that you didn't know then.
I started off with working a lot of startups and SMEs because I thought they move quickly. It's interesting. I was a bit wary of working in a large enterprise, and then did that relatively late in my career, 10 years or more into it. And it's not an either or. But actually, in hindsight, I would have worked for a bigger company sooner, because it's that variety of experience that's most valuable. What you learn in a small place is to move fast, to not be afraid to break things, get your hands dirty. But what you learn in a big company is more about how to approach things in a structured manner, maybe how you can deploy large resources. You can't do it as often. You have to make it count. They're such different skills. You learn more PowerPoint in a large business. So try and work in a small one, a medium one, and a large one, and then you can really understand the spectrum of companies and approaches, rather than thinking only, that one is my style and I'm just going to stick to that.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Where do you go for your inspiration when you're looking to, grow your knowledge? Are there books or podcasts or conferences that really inspire you recommend?
I probably have signed up to too many blogs. There's a lot of people I follow, newsletters, also on LinkedIn. I read quite widely and voraciously. It's just what I'm like. But also, what you find is different sources of information. Some people maybe have been there and done it, and they can write first-hand experience. But then there's a couple of sites I like. One specializes in SEO split test. Another one specializes in CRO testing, by which I mean they don't do it. But what they do is they publish the results of tests on a regular basis. They have this whole library of successful and unsuccessful tests that run elsewhere. So sometimes you want the stories and the anecdotes. Sometimes you just want to see what works, and they all come from different places.
No, that sounds like an excellent site. Is that one that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
I'd have to dig out its name from, I don't, but
That's all right.
It'd be easy to find. I could share it in the link afterward.
Sure. Well, I know people out there are going to want to, did you have it?
On the SEO side, Search Pilot is one of them.
Excellent. So people, I'm sure, are going to want to connect with you now because they're like, oh, what's the site? So how would people connect with you? I know you're also starting a new website that's going to be launching probably when this podcast go live. So
I am.
Yeah.
Like all websites, it's taking far longer than we ever imagined. But the new agency name is going to be Client Brain. The website's going live in the next 2-3 weeks, around the time when this should be broadcast. But in the meantime, I've been very active and very connected on LinkedIn for many years. So LinkedIn is always a good place to find me. Just look me up by name. I've connected to over 18, nearly 19,000 people on LinkedIn. So I started many years ago. But I'm not one of these people who will sit there rejecting people too easily.
Well, Anthony, really appreciate all your advice. And I wish you the best in your new website. We'll be looking for that when it goes live, and we'll put it in the show notes afterwards so people can easily click through there. Who are the best potential client that you think you could do the best work for, just so people can know, oh yeah, that's me?
I really like working with Scale Up. They're past the The problem with most startups, they're very small, they're early, they're strapped for resources. Scale up, so when things are starting to work, they've maybe got a bit more money, they've got a bit more success, they've got a team. They're really ready to double down and move fast, but they're not yet at the point of the enterprise where they're stuck in bureaucracy and politics and everything else is winning over really just making progress and getting stuff done.
Excellent. So if you're a scale up out there and you need help with SEO and SEO, we'll reach out to Anthony on LinkedIn, and hopefully we'll have his site up by the time this podcast goes live. Thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you, Jonathan. Looking forward to it.
Cutting Edge Web Content Development is brought to you by ButterCMS. To find out how you can build better with Butter, stop wasting dev time, and free your marketers from your legacy CMS, visit ButterCMS.com. Also, make sure to search for Cutting Edge Web Content Development in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at ButterCMS, thank you for listening.